Thanks for staying with us. Wednesday saw many motorists spend hours on the road coming through Alakbere to the 3rd Mainland Bridge. Now, the Yanaworo Olokwameji area heading to the 3rd Mainland Bridge was among the areas heavily flooded, causing a gridlock that extended to Alakbere in the coastal city. Meanwhile, the federal government on Thursday said no fewer than 10 states and the Federal Capital Territory had either experienced various degrees of flooding or recorded casualties as rains intensified. The Minister of Water Resources and Sanitation, Professor Joseph Ustef, who dropped the red alert during a press briefing in Abuja, warned that 21 more states might suffer flooding. He stated this against the background of the Wednesday downpour, which grounded business and commercial activities in Lagos and Ogun states. Now, joining me to discuss this is Akimbode Oluwafemi, the Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, while he joins me via Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us at this point. You saw the flood that happened on Wednesday. What came to mind immediately that happened?
Well, I think what came to mind is the fact that we cannot be doing things the same way and expect different results. If you just cut your mind back, there was flood last year, 2023, that displaced close to 3,000 persons in Lagos. 2022, we had about 1.3 million Nigerians displaced, about 700 people died. Same for 2021. So flooding is now becoming one of the yearly rituals in this country because we as a nation, we've just refused to do what we need to do. The fact remains that climate change is real. The frequency, the intensity, and the duration of rainfall is getting more and more different. And there is also the human-induced flooding activity, particularly in cities like Lagos. And we've not seen a very coherent flooding response, mitigation strategy. All we see is that there are NIMET announcements, and we see pockets of movement by people in government that will say, oh, there's going to be heavy rainfall in Lagos, and then you don't see any corresponding action. There's a lot that we need to do from the side of the government, but also as a people, in order to ensure that we don't see this over and over again. I was caught up in the flood, like mostly every other Lagos residents, and it wasn't funny. The joke now is that mechanics are, smiling to bank. When there is flood, lives are lost, properties are damaged, people are displaced. And this is actually more sad at a time that we're having a public health strategy, tragedy. There is the cholera outbreak currently in cities around Nigeria, including Lagos. Don't forget that about 3 or so years, or more years ago, one of the biggest cholera outbreaks was caused by a flooding incident that actually washed sewage into the rivers that people drink from. Now we're trying to contain cholera, and then we still have this calamity of flood in Lagos. We also must look at the public health impact of flooding. And so I expect to see a much more coherent response on the side of government and a very structured approach. The interesting thing is that we've not even heard much from NEMA since this flood started. And it's actually, for me, it's disheartening because this is a national emergency. People's properties are lost, houses have been damaged, people have died. People lost their children that are coming to school. And so we need to take this issue much more serious and begin to have a very well-structured to the issue of flooding. There are basically two types of flooding. The flooding caused by overflow of riverbank, and I remember, I think it was 2020, that was the year Nigeria was discussing Lado River in Cameroon. Yeah. After that discussion, nobody is saying anything again. And of course, flooding caused by, intensified rainfall like we've seen on Wednesday. what do we need to do is that we need to ensure that our interrelationship with environment that is inducing climate change will reduce that, and of course mitigation level, things that we need to do. I heard the commissioner for the first time speaking about some roads will be reconstructed in terms of elevating them in Lagos. These are concrete steps that we need to do. The silting of the drainages, not the planning, architectural plan of Lagos. You find out that some rivers are disappearing. Odo Alaro in Ojota is suddenly disappearing. And people will no longer remember there was a river. Lagos State that crisscrossed the entire state.
What about the Bar Beach?
Exactly. And the rising sea level. We just must wake up, or else it's going to be getting worse all the time. And 2025, we'll be here again talking about flood.
And that seemed to be the sad thing, because like you earlier mentioned that this is a yearly ritual that we have to face in this country, albeit that it's quite a ritual that no one likes to be in, no one likes to experience. Do you think the government is just paying lip service, or would you also blame our lifestyle as individuals? Like you see people throwing drainages inside a flowing river, expecting the dirt to move to other areas, and forgetting the fact that these dirt go and settle in a particular area, and that causes flood as well.
So the government has a huge responsibility, and they should stop shying away from those responsibilities. The government sets the agenda. In fact, they even set the agenda for people's behaviors. So when you allow, who approves buildings that are on drainages in Lagos, for instance? Who is giving permits to people that are constructing on river, ways and river belts along the city? Now, when it also comes to disposal of wastes, the government also must do what? Set that agenda. There are things that they need to even incorporate into the housing design in an urban city like Lagos. That if I bring my building pattern, there are things you are supposed to check. We can't just allow people to continue to build indiscriminately and consume indiscriminately, but yet citizens themselves do have the right, because this is becoming an emergency and all of us are becoming victims of our action. So citizens need proper education about not to use drainages to dispose waste and the rest of them. And of course, where there are no penalties, where there are no enforcement, people will continue to do what they have to do. So the state must enforce their own laws on architectural design, on laws on environment, and the rest. But they should also give their own side of the bargain.
Okay, so if you're saying that the government, there should be penalties, like I was watching, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, watching a story in China where if you have to, there are no waste bins outside. That if you have to hold, if you're eating, for instance, a cupcake, that dirt, you hold it in your hand, or you put in your pocket till you get to your house, because there's a penalty for that. What do you think, a penalty for throwing dirt on the road, what do you think should be the appropriate penalty for if anybody is found to have thrown dirt outside his car or just throw it on the road and is caught?
See, for me, I don't always agree that they should victimize, people. First is that the government must ensure that there are, waste bins in public places. Do you understand? I always give the example of people cannot do certain things in the open when there are no public toilets and the rest of them. And I spoke about setting the agenda. There is a lot that has to do with public education. Then when you've done that, which is the side of the bargain for government, then you can then be thinking of the punitive measures. A lot of people don't even know there are, those things are bad. So they eat their gala inside the bus and boom, they throw the dirt outside. There was a time that the government in this country was enforcing waste baskets in all public transports. Set the policy guidelines, and then you can then enforce it. When there are no laws, then there are no sinners.
All right, so the government as well has said, we're not just talking about Lagos though, but the government has said that about 21 local governments should be expecting flood. And we see this year in, year out. Of course, even the government came out and said those and advised those in high and low living areas should go to higher grounds. What mitigating factors should we have put in place before now?
So, last year, we spoke about government mapping flood-prone areas, and that our response should not be this fire brigade response. So if we've done appropriate mapping of the flood-prone areas in our country, and then we, as at today, we can project, rainfall patterns and the rest of them, because NIMET has actually done a very good job. So it's to be able to prepare those communities. We know people do have cultural affiliation, attachment to places they live, but again, government must provide the alternatives, provide the education and the enablement for people to be able to move from all these disaster-prone areas. And as you said, this is not about Lagos, just because most of the digital media team in Lagos and people could see what was happening in Lagos. A lot happened in FCT. There are states that Imo had about 12 local governments covered with flood and the rest of them. So I also think that there should be proper coordination between the federal government and the state government, because the pattern we're seeing, the flooding pattern we're seeing today cannot be left in the hands of local governments or state governments alone. So coordination from the federal to state level is extremely important. Don't also forget that when we're talking about displacement, there is also issue of security, because you cannot just be asking people to move from one location, particularly several parts of the country where there are security challenges. So this is the kind of coordination that we're talking about here.
Okay, so in all of this, what role do you think urban planning and infrastructural developments play in preventing flooding in not just Lagos, but every part of Nigeria?
Extremely important role. I mentioned it earlier. People build indiscriminately. People build without, making provision for drains in front of their houses. These are part of what they need to go back and, revise our building plans, our structural development plan, how our cities are designed. There are people that actually block drainages. There are people that, as they said, are very influential, that have businesses in open places. There are even cities around the world that they do allow for something like a reservoir. When you sandfield like we're doing in Lagos, you provide for a portion of the land that will almost even serve as a reservoir or like a dam to take in some of the waters. Because it's look as if everybody thinks that Lagos was a plain. No, it was a tributaries of so many rivers. And so we just want to build and cast blocks all over the place. Where do we think the waters will go to? Okay. And most importantly, there's also some structural designs in order to make the city, to leave the design so that the waters can flow back into the sea or to the Atlantic.
Okay, so before we go, just quickly, what can communities do in their local areas to ensure that they are not adversely affected by flood?
Well, I think the biggest thing is for Nigerians to know that there's going to be more of this kind of rains. All of us should take action. People should be aware of, their interaction with the environment, and please, even where government are not silting drainages, we can begin use our community squads, our community system to be able to keep those drains flowing and keep our people safe. I think now all of us as Nigerians, as communities, have a role to play in ensuring the safety of our people and our property.
All right, thank you so much for talking to us. Of course, Akimbode Oluwafemi, the Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation, Africa. Thank you very much for joining us at this point. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so much.
Well, that standpoint this week. Remember, you can watch the repeat broadcast at 11 p.m. tonight and 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. Thanks for watching. I am Theophilus Ilama. Bye.